You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast. Do you think God purrs for you? Today, we are going to be discussing Aslan purring. Guys, we're talking about the 5th installation of the Narnia books, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Going to go through all of that. Obviously, you could tell what one of my favorite parts are. This is Systematic Geekology. We are the Priest to the Geeks. I'm Joshua Knoll, one of the co-hosts of the Whole Church podcast. Today, I am joined by Joe Day, host of Buddy Walk with Jesus, and Pastor Will Rose of Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Guys, what y'all been geeking out on lately?
I am going back through Teen Titans from the early 2000s, the original Teen Titans series. We're on season 3, and it is a fantastic nostalgia trip.
Yeah, just almost a perfect series. I'm not sure it's not a perfect series. It's just been a while since I've seen it, so I don't want to say perfect. All right, Will, what you been geeking out on lately?
Yeah, I love those too, and now that I have HBO, it's in my queue. Like there's so much I want to, watch and consume, but the time is limited. But it's there, sitting at me, staring at me every time I pull up that my list and queue for HBO. I'm geeking out that it's summer. And hopefully I'm going to go to the beach here pretty soon. And I've been watching today. I was watching the World Surf League live contest from El Salvador and the pros surfing down there. And you guys have heard me talk about the WSL before, kind of like the NFL and NBA of pro surfing. And so the best of the world's down in South America right now surfing a contest. And I was trying to get work today, but in the background watching these surf heats and trying to stay focused, but it really wasn't working. I was watching surfing.
Yeah, I've been just rereading Miss Marvel comics by G. Willow Wilson. Anything that she did, I'm like, with the show going on, I'm just diving back into that. And it's really one of those, man, the books are just so drastically better. Not that the show's not good. I just really love those comics. Well, guys, today we're here. We're going to talk about Voyage of the Dawn Treader, like we said. And you guys have heard, we've doing this series, our year of C.S. Lewis. You've heard Joe's introduction to the Narniad. You've heard Will's introduction. I have yet to be on our C.S. Lewis year, which is amazing because I love C.S. Lewis. I just, unfortunately, had a really hard time getting into the Narnia books. I actually, and just kind of going through my history with it, growing up, I was not a big reader until college, really. And at that point, I was getting my hands on deep theology books and really heavy reads, and Narnia just didn't really fit that. A lot of the other stuff I read from C.S. Lewis was really intellectually challenging for me, and Narnia was, to me, came off as just kind of, it's a nice story, and just, it's a very direct allegory. Cool. Not my cup of tea. I was more, Lord of the Rings, all those challenging reads for me was sort of my gig. And I just dismissed Narnia as Lewis's worst work. Then, one time at Charleston Southern, we had an event from the C.S. Lewis Institution, and someone came to speak and then was talking about Lewis's theology of the imagination. And he talked about a scene from Voyage of the Dawn Treader that I'm going to focus on a little bit later, chapter 10, with the magic book, the magician's book. And he talked about how another quote outside of the Narnia books where Lewis talks about how imagination has a way of getting around your intellectual guards and letting you see a picture that you wouldn't be able to see head on. And that's the power of story. And he used this illustration to kind of point to, look at what happens with Lucy here and how she's able to see things she wouldn't have been able to see directly, and how the book allowed her to see the invisible. I'm going to talk more about that later on, but that's kind of my introduction to Narnia. Still not my favorite series, but once I was able to see the power of imagination, the power of books, I got back into it. I actually ended up trying to start with Magician's Nephew. Wasn't my cup of tea. I read Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which checks all the marks for me. It's on water. I love all sea-related things. It's very episodic, so I could read a part, put it down, and come back. Had that. It had the Hamlet kind of family royal drama stuff going on. Literally checked all the boxes of things that I loved. So once I read it, I had to see all the story around it. And that's what got me into the Narniad. So Joe, we are on the 5th book. Could you summarize the story so far? For those who haven't heard our other 4 episodes on the books of Narnia, what's going on before this book starts?
So, yes, technically, this is book number 5. Chronologically,
Yes,
this
Joe.
is
Preach.
this is the third installment
Amen.
in the series.
Who cares about chronologically?
Right. So we are coming off of the events of obviously The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then Prince Caspian, the things, what does life look like after the children return home? And in this one, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we are very much, again, repeating. We are repeating the process with characters that this is kind of a last of the originals installment of the Narniad, where we're following the two youngest, Lucy and Edmund. I think Peter, if memory serves me correctly, Peter is off at school, and Susan is, I believe, in America. Yep. And then the two youngest are staying with their cousin Eustace. And Eustace might, in fact, be one of the most annoying characters that I've ever, like, for people that don't enjoy annoying characters and what they contribute to a story, I fully understand with this particular character why for some people it's such a turnoff, especially when you get into the movies and stuff like that, because that kid did a fantastic job of bringing this character to life. So this time they're brought back, and I want to avoid doing a beat for beat, because this is one of those stories that you just have to take in its entirety, because I can't possibly do it justice. But they're brought in by way of a painting of a ship, and they are transported into, this is very much the seafaring rendition, like Josh was talking about, of the story. And after a brief reunion with Caspian, who they realize that it's been 3 years since they've last been to Narnia, and Caspian's tracking down the seven great lords of Narnia. And you go through, as you're tracking down each one of these lords, there's talk of Aslan's country in a much clearer way than in books previous. And you have your typical, in Lewis's works here, you have your typical conflict with the human condition moment, if you will, temptation and personal identity and things like that, until eventually things come to a bit of a climax for Eustace, who gets turned into a dragon. Yeah, like I said, there's so much that happens in each one of these books that if I could just make the recommendation now, just go through and read them, like we've been saying for the last several episodes as we've covered the Narniad. But you see kind of a coming of age tale moment of Eustace. You see him kind of a fast track of his maturation process as Aslan is reintroduced into the story and appears miraculously to Eustace, turning him back into a human through the ripping off of the skin, in probably the most symbolic moment in the entire story of that shedding process that Eustace has to go through at the hands of Aslan. And then we come to a conclusion with the intersection of Aslan with the kids, who are not kids by this point, and we see that they are all sent back. The kids maturing out of their time within Narnia, and we see that this time has borne a very significant impact on Eustace, even in the real world,
Yeah, I hear turning into a dragon and having, God rip your skin off and have you born again completely changes you.
Yeah.
I love that whole thing, and I loved the kind of inside joke of everyone liking him better as a dragon.
Yeah.
I was like, it was great. Will, was there anything you would like to add to just kind of the beat to beat what the story is about as far as the Voyage of the Dawn Treader goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just captivated by this particular book because it was the third one that I read when reading through these Narnia series. And I've shared before that I wasn't a big reader growing up, but when I went off to my first summer as a camp counselor in college, I took all these books with me. And in between being with campers and at night, we didn't have cell phones or TVs and things to like just check or doom scroll. I had these books by flashlight or candlelight to read these books, and it was very magical for me to encounter these books. And like you said, this kind of episodic island to island, adventure to adventure was great because I could read a little bit, put it down, and couldn't wait to see what happens next. And so out of all the books, this tends to be my favorite, the one I love the most, only because it just captivated me so much. And really, this is a book about Edmund and Lucy and Prince Caspian and Aslan, but I really think it's the transformation of Eustace that this book is about, because the first sentence literally says, "There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it." That's the first sentence. And then the last sentence or the last paragraph is just when he returns back home, how everybody notices how much he's changed and how nicer he is, and what a boy, except his own like parents who are like, wow, and C.S. Lewis in here digs at like modernity and post-modernity and modern parents and what they're into or not, but like how much he's changed for the better. And so I really think it is his trend. So the peak or climax of this book, or the rising crest of this wave, is chapter 6, when he's turned into a dragon and then he's transformed into a new person because of his encounter with Aslan. And so the whole book is just fantastic. But I would say it is episodic, but these 7 lords, this going from one to the next, it's not like C.S. Lewis is also, I mean, some of these 7 lords, it's not that they find all of them. Some of them perish. Some of them are not around. Some of them do survive. Some of them are still, so it's not like, oh, we found one, move on. Found one, move on. Found one. It's not a happy ever after every single beat, every chapter. There's twists and turns and all kinds of diverse magical lands. He's throwing everything he can at this particular book, these ideas. You may even have like a fallen star, like a star who's like talking and has a daughter and all those things. So it's really a lot of neat characters.
I will draw a comparison for all of you DC fans out there. If you are the type that enjoys storytelling, like when they did DC Rebirth and went with Shazam and the Magic Lands and did that whole series, that is very much, if you're into that, this is the kind of storytelling for you. And I'm really interested in the fact that this is the first one that you specifically read, Josh, because I point to something like Dawn Treader, and I would say that this is probably a summation of most of the points of that I like best about fantasy. For me, when fantasy is done at its absolute best, it looks like Dawn Treader. And you had said something at the beginning of what you were and weren't looking for out of this. And I think that that's probably the most articulate that I have heard any kind of Lewis compared with something else, even if it's Lewis against Lewis or Lewis against Tolkien, or a lot of the different comparisons that happen there. It really comes down to what is it that you're looking for? Because if you're looking for blow for blow action and wall to wall just craziness, Tolkien's probably your guy. I will say that the Lord of the Rings books are far more active than the Narniad. But for me, when I read something like this is everything that I love about fantasy, because this is a whole world, and it has stakes, and it has imperfect people, and it has people that you can get behind, and it has an ultimate hope and different things like that. Is it a little bit cheesy in comparison to its contemporaries? Absolutely. I'll be the first one to admit it. But for me, it's cheesy in all of the best possible ways,
Yeah. So lots of things with everything you guys said. I want to say that I think the island by island kind of nature of it does make this a really good summer read, since we Will talked about being excited for summer, geeking out on summer. This is a perfect one to pick up while you're at the pool, read the story of one island, put it down, maybe read the next island the next day. It's fine. Also, I think it lends itself great to a video game. Bethesda, I know you're listening. Please create Dawn of the Void Treader, the video game. We have 4 main characters to choose from, so it's the perfect size team for a game. You have the go find the 7 lords, a bigger story behind that, even a dragon battle. Come on, guys. This is the story for a game. Anyway, also, I hate to say this, I relate so much to Eustace because I always have felt like I was the annoying kid. I was the one that people didn't want to be around. Like, I always felt like that was me. And just seeing his change and his wrestle with, I know I'm annoying, so I'm just going to be more annoying and lean into it. And seeing him change to tender up to kind of a different person through that big salvation moment where Aslan baptizes him, more or less. And I'm like, this is it. That is my, like, that's me. Like, I can relate to that. And a lot of the other characters throughout all the books, I had a hard time being like, yeah, that's me, relating to them. I understood them. I saw them in other people. But having the person who is, yeah, I'm annoying and people don't like me. Hey, cool. I get feeling that way. Anyway.
Another part of this book, too, is that, in the first book, Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, you have all 4, Peter, Susan, Edmund, Lucy. Then you have them come back to Prince Caspian. But at the end of Prince Caspian, Aslan shares that Peter and Susan aren't allowed to come back, that their time in Narnia is over. So it's now Edmund and Lucy's time to have their adventure there in this third book of the trilogy. And then at the end of this book, they're not allowed to come back, but it's Eustace that comes back for other adventures later on. And then you have the prequel with the Magician's Nettie. But we talk about Eustace as this transformation that has within the book. There's this part in the book where he's kind of confessing and sharing, witnessing testimony to what happened with him and how Aslan came to him and stripped, and he apologizes. He literally apologized for being rather beastly. And then Edmund says this. He goes, "That's all right," said Edmund. "Between ourselves, you haven't been as bad as I was on my first trip to Narnia. You were only an ass. You were only an ass. I was a traitor." And so I'm like, oh man, that's so good. So like, there's this confession, repentance, transformation that is a part of the Christian life. C.S. Lewis does a lot of theology and talks about the Trinity and who is Jesus and that kind of thing. But then again, that transformative nature of growing into the person that God's calling us to be, is you see it unfolding in a children's book.
Oh yeah, and that's how a lot of discipleship needs to look like. I mean, if you're in the church and you're listening, that's it, right? You'll have new Christians who are like, man, I can't believe I was this much of a sinner, and man, I did this and this. I can't, I constantly hear people feel like, well, I can't be in ministry. I used to be a blank. And that's when the more experienced in the ministry are like, oh, you don't even know how bad I was. You only did this. I was the chief of sinners, to quote Paul, right? That is discipleship modeled at its best. Would now be a good time for me to just gush over chapter 10, the part that sold me on this whole series.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Okay, guys. I can't express how much I love this whole scene. So Lucy is in the magician's house, and she goes upstairs to find this book. It's a book of spells. It's a incarnations or something. I forget what it's called, but basically a witch book for people, whatever. I know some people have problems with magic and witches, but that's basically what this is. And she opens it up, and the way it works, it's like you can turn forward, but you can't turn back. There's all these different rules. She flips through this book. The image are coming to life as she's going through it. And there's one where it's, you can see yourself the way that everybody else sees you. And, a lot of the stuff of, oh, you can be the most beautiful person. And you kind of see revealed to her when the imagination is open to, I can make this happen. You get this look of how Lucy really sees herself as not the most beautiful. As she does have some self-image problems, and she's been the good one this whole time, but she still has that attached to her. Then she comes across a spell where she can make the invisible visible, which makes me think of like Romans 1:20, where it's the even the invisible attributes of God have been known from the beginning, right? So she says this thing, and you start to see different things come to life that were invisible all around her. And next thing you know, Aslan shows up, and she runs up and she hugs him, and he's like, I've always been here. When you made the invisible visible, of course you saw me. I'm always here. I never left you. And man, that was powerful. And it said when he was hugging her, when she was hugging him, she thought she could almost hear him purr. And that to me, that was just such a moment to me where I'm like, man, God of the universe loves us so much that when we embrace him, I don't think that God purrs. Let me go ahead and put that out there. I don't think God purrs, but that imagery of just how much God loves us, that he was able to portray that through this image of a lion purring, was amazing. Then she one of the spells she found in the book was she found a story of refreshment was one of the spells. And she couldn't flip back to read it again. And she's like, Aslan, will you tell it to me? Will you tell it to me? I can't find it in the book. It won't let me go back. And he says, I will tell you that story over and over for years and years to come. Man, what a line. What a moment. The God of the universe wants to comfort you for years and years to come. I was sold. That was it. That was the moment that I was like, okay, yep, this is gold. That's what I needed in life at the moment that I picked this book up.
So yeah, that let me jump right in there, because that's one of those things that's it's so beautiful when you see even a reflection of that wonderful truth. And I think, for a long time we have seen a focus on fear the Lord your God, and in other contexts, love the Lord your God, but far too little emphasis is put on the God that we love and respect and fear and worship loves us back individually. And has and seeks for that individual nature. Yes, there is the 1A and 1B of that conversation. That is the individual and the corporate. We cannot forget the corporate in the whole matter, but just because we do not forget the corporate does not mean that negates the individual. And that is such a game changer when you make that connection point and you realize, well, what if the gospel is getting at surrendering your life and becoming one with God, surrendering the self and just entering into that relationship wholeheartedly with God. That's beautiful. And like we said, I think it was Dan and I on the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe episode. Part of what I fundamentally believe makes works like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Narniad as a whole. And I highlight the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because it's the biggest example of this. But I would say in this trilogy, there's others obviously, but The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader are very much a trilogy within a greater whole of the storytelling. That it's shown throughout all of it, this reflection of the truth. You have the truth, you have the source material. What do? You go to scripture. You want to know more about God's character and more about this whole kingdom thing, the gospel of the good news of the kingdom of God, then turn to scripture ultimately. But God gave us all creativity and passions and the entirety of the thesis statement of systematic ecology. And part of that is we can use that to reflect the source material. And I really do believe that it is so gorgeous in its beauty and its grandeur and everything over here that even when it's reflected by other sources, it's still beautiful. It's still rich. And then you couple that with somebody like Lewis that wrote the world that he did in the style in which he did it. Yeah, this is the thing that is just so rife with truth and allegory, but also creativity and fiction, and you create this beautiful soup that for me gets right at that core of the things that really make me geek out and make me appreciate processing geek culture and different IPs and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that might be part of what really sold me on this book over some of the others is like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is great. It's telling that story of the God that sacrificed and came back. I grew up in the church. I've heard that story a million times. Right. I come across this. You do not hear a million times that God wants you to just hold on to him. And he wants to tell you comfort, years and years of comfort.
Very true.
Will, I heard you start.
No, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, that in terms of like that love and grace of God that was there from the beginning and has always been with us. That God, it's not just us loving God. That's of course 100% important, but that's that God loved us first. And so
Right.
here's
Hmm.
Aslan. It has always been there in Narnia. Yeah, he came back and made a dramatic appearance back and changing winter to summer and the thawing out of Narnia and the Lion, the Witch, and the
Hmm.
Wardrobe. But here you see in this kind of the daily lives of the adventurers in the book, um, their encounters with Aslan does hold up a mirror. It does transform them. They do wrestle with their identity and their expectations of how they see themselves, how they see others, and their callings and gifts in the world. And it's kind of what we do here with, or it is what we do with systematic ecology. Like we hold up these stories and these things we geek out on as a mirror or a reflecting pool or a magic book that we're there looking through to capture our imagination that will reveal the truth of the deeper questions and things that we're all asking
Hmm.
and wrestling with. And so yeah, this particular book and that scene with Lucy with the book where this holding up a mirror of how she sees herself and a different angle or a different way. Hopefully all these different IPs and things we geek out on, whether it's Star Wars or Miss Marvel or sports, wrestling, and Narnia holds up a mirror that can help us understand deeper who we are and who we're called to be from the God who loved us first.
Joe.
So you had mentioned vibing hard with Eustace and seeing a lot of you in Eustace. For me, even though I found these books well into my adult years, I saw a lot of me in Lucy during that scene. I I don't know how long I've had this cuz reality is perception in a lot of instances, but I for as long as I can remember have struggled with body dysmorphia, like legit body
Hmm.
dysmorphia, not like bad self-image, but like you don't see what's actually there sort of thing.
Yeah.
And to see it authentically, that showcased, especially at a time where beauty standards were different, and that a bit of that also goes into
Hmm.
when we have a conversation about the movie and how the movie tackled this part of the story.
Mhm.
We did not grow up in a time, and I know for generations that came before us, in a lot of respects, they had it even harder than our generation did. But our generation didn't grow up in a friendly environment to having a bad self-image, or to be
Yeah.
to have mental illness or any
It's
of
true.
those things. I'm not trying to say Lucy had, but I'm saying that even talking about that significance is so there, to be addressing that, especially in a young woman. It just, yeah, it's layered, it's nuanced, and it's one of those things that it doesn't matter if you are of the actual grouping that's being referenced. So if you are a young woman reading this, or our age woman, or us, or whatever, so many people can take something like that and be able to identify themselves in that, and then to see that particular, the way that circle was squared was through the intervention of the divine, we'll say, whatever, like
Yeah.
that is what it is, even though they don't out and out use that language within canon.
It come pretty close
uh
though.
they do come
It
pretty
does.
close, they all but use the phrasing, but you know it's so gorgeous because you can sit there and learn all these different, steps to a better mindset and steps to this and that, and I'm not devaluing psychology or anything like that, because I, of all people, will rally behind people getting help and all of
Yeah.
and normalizing that. But
Absolutely.
I can tell you that the only thing that has made me cool with being alone in a room with me is understanding fundamentally my identity in Christ. And that
Mhm.
sounds like the Hallmark answer. I know it does, guys. Trust me. I tried to fight against that Hallmark answer because I didn't want it to be that cheesy. I didn't want it to be that's simple, I think, in a way of doing it, because what if God wasn't there? Then I'm left alone with myself again. But that's the gimmick. Aslan's always there, God's always there, and we circle back to the topic at hand.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially people like us, I'll say, sometimes life is so hard, we don't like the idea that there's a simple answer. Like we hate that idea. Like, it's so hard, it has to be, the answer has to be difficult, or else why haven't I found it yet?
Yeah.
You know, that's sort of the mentality. And really, a lot of times the answer is that, right? It is hold on to God and let him purr over you. Yes, I'm being cheesy, but get over it. Okay.
Hey,
so.
we had a conversation before I hit record about cats, and so the fact and the fact that you're bringing up purring and God, I think is pretty fun.
Yeah. So that is my favorite part of this book. Did you guys have a single favorite part or a favorite island maybe that they visited that you'd like to share?
So at the time where they come across the body of water that will turn you into gold was probably the most allegorically impactful for me. I am a serial entrepreneur by trade. I have been a part of entrepreneurialism in the business world now for almost a decade. And when I first came across these, I was still very much steeped in that culture and what does my life look like now, and having like success and money and all of those things not be the central focus and all of those kinds of things. And so that I already went on about the Lucy scene, but that is probably the other most impactful thing for me, because it showed a human side. Yes, we all like a protagonist that, will eventually overcome the odds, and we know that they will overcome the odds and all of those kinds of things. I like 80s cartoons as much as the next guy does. It's all good. But there's value in being able to see human struggle within your main characters. That's part of what I loved about the last one, and the temptation with the White Witch. That's really what I think is so brilliantly displayed in this trilogy of books, is the human side of it all. And me, that human side was, like I said, expressed in that scene in a major way that didn't directly involve Aslan, because, you love the magical moment of being able to see that God is always with you and all of those kinds of things. And it's a good reminder. And when it's portrayed in this way through Aslan, but there are points in this where it seemingly gets dark, and it's seemingly a lot of human processing and things like that. And I think it's valuable to see that part of the story told as well.
Oh yeah. Like, a lot of this is allegory upon allegory, and he managed to stack them and interweave them in just a beautiful way. Will, did you have a favorite island or a favorite scene?
Yeah, I'll go back to Eustace as transformed into a dragon and then being transformed back into a new person, and that description of being trying to tear it off himself, but it was really the claws of Aslan that tore it off. That was such a great impact. And then again, the seafarer part, just being on the ocean's great. But Reppy Cheap, is that how you say his name? Reppy Cheap? Like,
what a great character.
What a great character. And I see him almost like the Hobbit of this world, in terms of like Lewis's way of the small, or what you would think would be small and insignificant, ends up being the most, has the most valor and bravery of them all. And his journey going to the very end of the sea, crossing over to Aslan's country, the new land, is pretty powerful, because that's his story comes to a close, and he's able to assume and be with Aslan. Like, what a great, and him and Eustace becoming friends at the end and becoming buddies, because there were such enemies there at the beginning. That transformation, the friendship that emerges out of that,
just gives me chills to think about that, honestly. Where I'm like, Reepicheep, just in general, you can almost hear his name and go, like, there's so much attached to that name, because no other character has that name in anything. So I'm like, oh yeah, it's very much like if someone says Sam, like Sam and Frodo, and I'm like,
yep.
Yeah, you don't need to say anything more. Like, just say the name. You wouldn't know it from looking at me, but most of my dad's side of the family are very short people. And they all have that fighting spirit. So when I read Reepicheep, I'm like, I know that character. And I'm like, yes, yes.
I know that guy.
That is right.
And it circles back around to what Tolkien and what C.S. Lewis is doing. Jesus often uses parables and teachings pointing to the things that are small or and that seem insignificant but have great impact, whether they're seeds or whatever. And I when we look at our universe and we see how vast it is, over and over again, science is telling us how small we are in terms of our planet and where we are in terms of humans and how many stars and galaxies. And I'm marveled by all that, and I geek out on that, and I love it. But there oftentimes attached with that is like, well, we're just small, and look how insignificant we are. But I'm like, no. You look back to what teaches Jesus. He made a conscious choice to point out the things that seemed small and insignificant as having impacts and being important. So no matter how small you are important. And even in the quantum world, we can go smaller and smaller and smaller. There's infinite smallness as much as there are infinite vastness within the universe. And maybe we're just right there in the middle. But I think that to me keeps going back to in terms of the ministry of Jesus and his teachings and these stories, whether it's Lord of the Rings or Narnia, that the small and what seems insignificant end up having a great impact.
Can I rip off your gimmick from the Jaws episode, Josh? I listened to that today, actually, and I was reminded, I really do vibe with Paul when he talks about the sum total of God being able to be experienced through his creation. And you look at something like the vastness of the ocean. I know in a lot of sermon illustrations and things like that, it's that whole idea of space. I know for you, you're a bit of a sci-fi nerd and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But generally speaking, if you're hearing an analogy from a pulpit, it's about space and the vastness of space and how small we are and all of those kinds of things. But then when but taking a step back and understanding the same idea just from a different angle, that there's so much of this creation just here that we have no idea what's there. We have no idea from the quantum level on up. We have no clue. It's simply uncharted and dangerous to the carbon-based life form to be able to go and check it out and be able to explore and things like that. And it just, you take a step back and realize that there are things at play regardless of where you land from a theological standpoint, from a scientific standpoint. You realize that there's these things at play that are going on around you that in comparison to you makes you simply a cog in the machine at best. And I understand that's a tough pill to swallow in a day and age where, one of you guys mentioned a book of incantations. That's basically what it is, because Lewis in his day, the big alternative is paganism. It's witchcraft, things like that. There's a reason why people, if they want to give a label to the day and age that we live in, it's neo-paganism. We see that on the regular all around us. And so I think that might be why some of this hits hard with our millennial generation, is because we are living in that. Not to exclude you, Will, but that has been, it's a lot of the younger people that are trying to have this cooperative effort between the New Age and the Christian to try and create something that isn't there. That was never meant to exist in the first place. That's why you have Christian witches and all this kind of nonsense. And I think that also is resonant in there, just to add to the nuance and beauty and different shading of this kind of story, because ultimately that's what it is. We love the hero's tale. We love different story archetypes, and a lot of this is Lewis drawing on that, like we've said. You know what I mean? Even if it's his wrappings at the core is elsewhere. And I think that is what makes it so, part of what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah. Just keep circling back to that, just chapter 10 for me. And I know we talked a lot about chapter 6 too. Those two chapters are just so powerful. And you're just talking about how small some of this makes us feel. I mean, to me, looking at string theory, looking at atoms, cells, neurons, protons, on all of these things, looking at how small, how detailed everything is more overwhelming than looking at how the vastness of space for me. And, for Will, it's space. And it's so interesting how we are reminded how small we are and also how much God loves us all in one book. And this one scene, we see this contrast where you're talking about paganism and the worldly mindset of thinking about my self image. And it's immediately contrast with how much Aslan loves her, right? It's like how much God loves us. And I'm like, man, what a contrast. This paganism, this worldly mindset has nothing on that.
Yeah.
That being said, man, and there's so much more I'd like to talk to. I mean, I would love to just sit here and discuss an hour of how he portrays the sea. I love how he just describes it. I could describe the island where there were slavery was still a thing and the analogy there. There is so much in this book. But one thing I did want to circle to before we wrapped up, you both mentioned how this was kind of the end of one trilogy, right? This was the Return of the Jedi, Will called it, that sort of thing. I also think that it's the beginning of the next trilogy. It is somehow both the end and the beginning, because you see this end of the one story of the main, four that we started with, but this is the first of another trilogy where you kind of see Eustace's start, and it goes through this, the Silver Chair, and the final battle. And one thing that I love the end of this, where Aslan says, "You'll know me by a different name in your land," and then it proceeds to say, "And Eustace became nicer."
Yeah.
So how should people prepare for the next two books? So we have two left in this series.
Well, let me circle back around that. I do think that's a powerful moment in this book where you talked about Aslan telling Edmund and Lucy that they can't come back there, but they will discover him by another name. And I think that's just C.S. Lewis being, of course, this is allegory. I'm talking about Jesus here, but this whole aspect of like using your imagination and fantasy to get to know Jesus through different means, not just reading all four Gospels and memorizing them. There's different ways of how you can know him on the other end of things as way too. A way to discover him, the way to discover Christ. Where is Christ? Christ is Christ, love is love, God is God, truth is truth, capital T, all around the world. So how do you get to know God by different means? And so by getting to know Aslan, you get to know Jesus. I think that's just a powerful, and you can do that from the other angle and other direction as well.
Yeah, I feel like for me, this is as close as I get to what I've giving you a bit of a hard time over the last several months that we've been a part of each other's lives, Josh, of being into that Disneyfied cupcake stuff and all of that. And you look at the reality of what we've got here, and this is meant to make you feel a way. This is meant to hit the nail directly on the head and say, you know what? We're getting at a thing here. This is what we're getting at. And just to almost break the fourth wall in that way and just go there and say that, I think that to me is so beautiful for exactly what it is, for everything that it is. Is it shield, sword and sorcery and all this nuance and this and that and this whole, no, that's not what it's meant to be though. If you want that, look elsewhere. But if you're looking for something that is a strong, foundational, unapologetic story wrapped up in honestly very compelling characters, because they're all based on very human archetypes, this is it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. Any other notes? I mean, I want to say you saw Eustace's salvation here. You see what he's going to be like as a Christian. He's not a Christian, but just roll with it because that's what this is. I'm excited for you guys to see more or less his walk after his transformation in the last two parts of this series. I don't think I'm on either of those books, so I hope our listeners enjoy what you guys put out. I'm sure Joe's part of it. But yeah, definitely, if nothing else, keep in mind Eustace for the next two.
Yeah, this made me want to go back and read The Silver Chair again. It's a great book. And if you want to hear more about Eustace or read more about him, go hop on that one. I'm gonna pick that one back up over the summer for sure.
Yeah, those are the next two in our series. We're going to talk about Silver Chair, then the final battle will be the last two, right?
Yeah. And just kind of for those that are tracking along with the reviews and stuff, if you are unfamiliar, we are now heading firmly into more world building. There is absolutely still character development and things like that, but a lot of this is scenery stuff with players that have already been established elsewhere, peppered in there. So
yeah. I love when you already have the characters and he's able to just get into it. The final battle as a book, that's if I had to pick a second favorite, that's probably my second favorite of the series. It's really good. So I'd definitely be looking forward to that. And if you guys want to hear our review of some of the movies, this is the last of the Disney movies, right? Was the Voyage of the Dawn Treader?
Yeah.
So you guys can go over to patreon.com/systematic geekology. We do review the movies. We're going to be reviewing Voyage of the Dawn Treader soon over there. That being said, let's go ahead and get into the wrap up, guys. Did either of you have any recommendations outside of the Narnia or maybe one of the other Narnia ads that you'd like to tell them to check out?
Yeah, I'm going to take the opportunity to just go ahead and plug the material, and especially if you've been tracking with the reviews and stuff, if you haven't read through the Narniad, it's one of the lighter reads, even though it's more books than some of the other contemporaries. I feel like you'll be able to get through it quicker. So that would be my recommendation: is go from pillar, go to post, and just read through all of the Narniad, and then geek out on all of the adjacent stuff to the Narniad, because there's a lot of material out there.
Joshua, you're saying that you had not watched the Voyage to the Dawn Treader movie?
I tried to watch the Disney movies. I made it through part of Lion Witch and the Wardrobe and just decided that I can't stand this so much that I didn't bother trying to watch any of the other ones.
Okay.
I didn't even finish that one.
Well, if you love the they do switch it up, and I was a little disappointed with the movie. I don't think I'm on the movie one, but my quick hot take is that, like, I so love that they were searching the lords and they were doing that stuff. In the movie, they're searching for swords, and there's like a grand battle at the end. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And the book doesn't have a climactic end to it. And so there were beats that I was like, oh man, that's not like the book. But still, all in all, I enjoyed it. I think the one who played Eustace did a great job, and my kids love it. So yeah, I recommend it, but just hold it loosely. It's not exactly like the book. The same beats are there, and Aslan does even say, "You'll know me by other names." So Disney even going out on a limb to say, like, yep, this is Christ, and you can find Christ in other ways, was very surprising that they even named it. I was like, oh, I'm proud of you guys. My recommendation would be, and I said this in another Narnia podcast that I was on with, talking about Prince Caspian, is if you haven't seen Shadowlands, the movie, which is a movie about C.S. Lewis, they made in the 90s, Anthony Hopkins is playing C.S. Lewis, and it's him wrestling with the problem of pain and joy. Yeah, it's not a direct biography of C.S. Lewis, but it's Anthony Hopkins playing C.S. Lewis and wrestling with the problem of pain when Joy gets cancer. And it's a very powerful movie, and I think very well done, and a great soundtrack. So go watch that movie. It's a movie with Anthony Hopkins playing C.S. Lewis.
All right. So my recommendation is going to be my favorite C.S. Lewis stories. Are the Trace trilogy or the Cosmic trilogy. They go by a couple different names. If you type in C.S. Lewis Space Trilogy, it will come up. I think we're reviewing some of those later on in the year.
Yeah, I want to get on
I
those.
think they're fantastic. I'll say they're probably not as well written as Narnia, but I like the concept better. Yeah. So that's where I fall with it. I really enjoyed those. I think it's on Patreon. Joe and I are going to debate which series is better. Which I got to say, it's sort of like debating, do you want 100 pounds of gold or 100 pounds of silver? Honestly, I'll take either. That being said, guys, go over to systematicgeekology.org. You can hit the drop-down menu, hit host. You'll see all of the other things that we're attached to, the other podcasts, our churches, all that stuff. Check us out there. Again, we're going to do the movie review on the Patreon. Also, we have a new series starting on Patreon called Drinks with Tejas, where our other host, TJ Blackwell, is going to be interviewing random ones of us each week about random types of drink. He might talk to me about sodas, Will about beer, and Joe about tea. We don't know yet. Go over there and find out. That being said, guys, let us know if you have anything you'd like us to read at our website as well. And remember, please remember, we're all the chosen people. When you hold on to Aslan, he will purr. We are a geekdom of priests. This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries podcast network.